Alright, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the one and only Wrestling Otaku channel. Of course, your personification of excellence on YouTube and YWC. And I'm back here. It is now officially Tuesday, July the 8th of 2025. So let's say what's going on, everybody. Hope you all are having a good one and all that kind of stuff. And got an off day today, so I just figure I kind of, I was out doing some things, getting some stuff, and came back in here and just decided to do a video. It's early, it's a little past 2 p.m., going on 2:30, so I figured I'd go ahead and give you guys a little video here. I've been thinking about it, and I got some more content coming as well. Several wrestling videos coming. We got AEW's All In Texas this upcoming Saturday. Going to give you guys my predictions for that, my full predictions for that video, now that some more matches have been announced for the card. And several other videos, one of which I talked about in a post where I'm going to be talking about the whole whether or not Triple H is necessarily the problem in WWE, at least creatively. I'm going to be talking about that in a future video and other stuff that I plan on talking about. But here today, with this video, I figure I'd talk about something a little different, something away from my usual content, if you will. This won't be a wrestling-related video or sports-related video, generally speaking. It's more going to be a video about life, or just my perception or my philosophy of life, or just generally speaking how I view living life, pretty much, if that makes any sense. So I don't know what realm that would fall in. I guess just a general topic, or just life philosophy, whatever, however you would consider this. But I just had a few things I want to say, while I'm thinking about it. I've been thinking about doing this video for a while now. I just figured I'd go ahead and do it, just give you guys some little random topic video here, just, kind of get some, expressing some, things I've been thinking about. Now, before I get into it, let me just say this little disclaimer here. Some of the opinions expressed, a little bit of the topic material that we're going to be talking about here may be somewhat uncomfortable for people to talk about, or for people to listen to. It may get a little uncomfortable, if you will, maybe a little morbid, in subject or in topic or whatever have you. And so, yeah, just giving you forewarning, just I might get a little real, quote unquote, with some things I'm going to say here. So just give you a little fair warning. But I've been alive for 36 years. I just turned 36 at the end of May. And, 36 years is quite some time. And I've seen quite a bit. I've experienced quite a bit in my life. Maybe not as much as some people. But I like to say that I've seen I've seen, a number of things. I've experienced a number of things. And over the course of my life, specifically within, I'd say, the last 10, 15 years since I became an adult, since I turned 18, I've seen, my view of the world, my view of how things are and how things were, has definitely shifted. It's changed, whatever have you, as I've grown up, as I've gotten older in my 20s and now in my 30s. My perception on things have, to a degree changed. I don't want to say full-on change, but just based on things that I've seen, that I've taken in and experienced, it's the old saying, you learn something new every day. Well, I do think that my view on the world and on life in general has definitely expanded a great deal since I graduated. And specifically things I've experienced within the last 5 years, it's really been quite a hectic last 5 years. A lot has happened in the world, and so I like to say that my philosophy on life has gradually shifted from what it was, or been altered from what it was. And so if you were to ask me, like, how I would, or what my view on just life, or living life, or whatever the case may be, is, I would tell you simply that, especially in this day and age when there's so much uncertainty in the world, so much uncertainty with, how this planet in general and the environment and stuff like that. You got all this talk of global warming and climate changes and the world ending and all that kind of stuff. It's just all kinds of just mumbo jumbo, just kind of happening at once. All this talk of everything happening in the political spectrum, especially in this country, and all this talk of world wars happening, World War III, and conflicts between countries and all that kind of stuff. It's just a lot of stuff going on in the world right now. It's just, it's a lot to take in. It's a lot to take in, especially if you're somebody like me who grew up on a more quiet and tranquil, peaceful, well, somewhat peaceful existence, in my childhood, for the most part, at least in terms of like, that aspect. I've had my troubles, as a child, and obviously being a overweight kid, I had my fair share of, getting picked on and stuff like that. Outside of that, I'm talking outside of that, outside of just personal perspective, I'm talking like the world in general. But now it's a little more uncertain, it's a little more stable. So if you were to ask me how one should live their life, I will tell you, you got to live your life to the fullest, Take every day and make the most out of it. Live life as best you can, because you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. My grandfather used to always tell me, he used to always instill this in me and my siblings. Tomorrow's never promised to you. At any point, snap of a finger, anything can happen. You could be here today, could be gone tomorrow. So you got to live life to the fullest. And what I mean by that is, I don't necessarily mean you got to have a lot of money, you got to have wealth or riches or shit like that. I'm not, because sometimes you can't do, people can't always afford to have that, or you can't. A lot of people don't have that, or they can't afford, or they don't have the opportunity to afford that, or whatever the case may be. What I mean is just make the best. Just make the best of what you got. Just live life to the fullest. Like I said, just live your life the way you want, and not for the sake of others, or for the sake of public perception or opinion or all that kind of stuff. And obviously, for a majority of my life, I've been not exactly in the best of health. I'm not perfect by any means. Obviously I'm a fat guy, I'm obese, all that kind of stuff. I've been this way since I was a kid. For as long as I can remember, for as long as I can remember, I've always been a big kid, chubby, whatever have you. So it's always kind of been a thing with me, throughout, my days in grade school, elementary, middle school, high school, and then in my adult years. I've gained some, I've lost some, but for the most part, I've always been big. And I've had not necessarily major health problems, but there were concerns. People bring up, like, if you go to a doctor or stuff like that. Of course, doctors, they'll tell you, any physician will tell you, you shouldn't be over a certain size, you shouldn't be big, blah 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 blah, all that kind of stuff, because it causes health problems, complications, all that kind of stuff. And I've never had, throughout my life, I've never had any serious major injuries or illnesses. Like, I've never had any broken bones, or I've never broken anything. I've never, taken any serious, falls or anything like that. I've never had any bones broken or anything dislocated or anything like that. I've never had to have surgeries or got gashed open and need stitches or anything like that. So I guess, in a ways, I'm thankful for that. I've never had any serious, in my life up to this point, I'm 36. In the 36 years of my life, I've never had any serious injuries or anything like that. So I can be thankful for that. I've had scrapes, bumps, bruises. At one point I had my nose, I've had nosebleeds. I've literally, at one point, I damn near had my nose broken, and I had blood coming out and stuff. That was when I was a kid. But I've taken little tumbles. I've had scrapes. I've had bumps, bruises, scratches, stuff like that. I've had, but outside of that, no major serious injuries or anything like that. No serious trauma, anything of that nature. No terminal illnesses or anything like that. Nothing major. No major sicknesses outside of just common colds, sore throats, stuff like that. So, but I'm far from, having the perfect health. Outside of my weight troubles, I've obviously got, my family's had a history of, pressure problems, high, blood pressure, hypertension, cholesterol, stuff like that. I've had relatives. My grandma, my late grandmother in specific, she had a litany. I don't want to say a litany, but she had several health problems leading up to her passing. She for many years she was a diabetic, which obviously that's a serious thing. Even now, there's no cure for that. But she was a diabetic. She also had kidney problems. Real bad. To the point where he needed to take medication for it. Well, it wasn't so bad to where she was like very close to potentially needing to be on dialysis. That's like kind of where it was. But luckily she never had to. But she did have kidney problems. She had a bad kidney. On top of being a diabetic, and on top of pressure problems, like I said, that's kind of plagued our family, or at least on my father's side anyway. And then also she had a condition called CHF, which is congestive heart failure, where there's like, I forget what it entails. I believe kidneys, it involves the kidneys or something like that. But like certain parts of your body will like be flooded. You'll get like fluid build up in certain parts of your body, like your legs or hands and stuff like that. And she did have that, and would have to take medication to get some of that stuff drained out. And if it's not treated, it can get up to like your lungs and your heart and stuff like that, and it can really mess up your internal organs. And yeah, that's a problem. So yeah, she had just a number of health problems on top of the fact that she was up there in age. She was 84 when she passed. Back in 2020. So she's lived on. Despite all the health problems, she made it to 84. Man, passed just a month before her 85th birthday. And it's like I still remember. It's almost been 5 years. Since my grandmother passed. It's been that long. But thinking about that, and then thinking about, just me personally, I've been obviously growing up, as a kid, I would take, regular checkups, and then as an adult, I would get kind of on and off, go to the doctor, they would tell me, obviously, you should probably, lose some of your body fat, whatever, because you might have, problems later. And, I did have kind of on and off issues with like blood pressure, cholesterol, kind of high and stuff like that. Obviously they wanted me to, kind of take control of that, or try and kind of keep that in check. And also, I was told once that this was a while back, this was years ago, but I was told that I have like an irregular heartbeat or something like that, which I don't know what that is. And one of my doctors actually suggested I be on medication for said irregular heartbeat, because I guess they didn't really say specifically. They just said it was a regular heartbeat. It's not anything serious, but it was just kind of a concern. And if you remember the CHF, that condition that my grandmother had, congestive heart failure, one of the conditions is an irregular heartbeat. So I don't know if that's necessarily hereditary, but that's just kind of, again, something that they brought up, many years ago when I went to the doctor. So, and it's just like, you look at all this kind of stuff, and it's like, obviously it's a concern. But, I look at it, and, I haven't been to, if I'm being honest, I haven't had a checkup or been to a doctor in I'd say a couple years now. It's been a while. And I've, for the most part, been all right. Like, I feel okay, like, outside of the occasional, cold here and there. I feel all right, some soreness here and there. That's mostly from working, and, being out in the fucking hot, being out in the heat or whatever, because it's been burning up, it's been really hot, the last couple of weeks, the heat wave and all that. Outside of that, just nothing serious. It's just, but I know, obviously, my health is I'm not in peak physical condition. I'm not in the best of health, but the thing about it is, kind of where I stand right now, where I sit right now, I'm kind of at the point where I don't really want to over concern myself with things like that. If, as long as I feel okay, I'm not in any serious pain or anything like that. Nothing's broken. Nothing feels off or anything like that. I don't have any serious conditions that will hinder my that won't hamper my daily life. I I say that I'm fine the way I am right now. So I'm at the point now where I'm not going to concern myself with things that I really don't have a whole lot of control over, if that makes any sense. You know, and I'm at this point in my life. I've had some losses. I've seen family members, loved ones, pets that I've loved. Lost, so on and so forth. Starting back from like 2003, my grandmother on my mother's side passed away tragically. Just out of nowhere. And it was unexpected. At least for me, it was unexpected. That was when I was young at the time. I was like 13, 14 years old at the time. That was way back when. Then my grandfather, who I lived with at one point. I lived with my grandparents, for a good period of time. My grandfather passed away in 2012. I was actually at the hospital when he passed, and yeah, that was probably the one that really hit me. Like that was a big loss. Like for me, that was a big loss, back then, and it affected it. Obviously not just myself, but the rest of my family. We were affected, adversely by that. And it's just like it was such a big loss. I miss my grandfather quite a bit. Even to this day. 2012 seems like an eternity ago. And then of course my grandmother, which all of you know about, passed away 5 years ago, in 2020. So, and then I've had two pets, two cats. One I lost in the same year I lost my grandfather in 2012. I also lost one of the cats that I loved, that I took care of for many years. My grandmother. His name was Ben. Passed away in 2012, and then of course recently, in the beginning of May, I of course lost Tiger Cat. I've had quite a bit of losses and such in my life, and I know that it's just one of those things you can't control. And I'm at the point now, getting back to kind of coming back to what I was saying before. I'm at the point now where I'm just going to live my life the way that I want. If I'm not in the best of health, so be it. It's just I'm not gonna agonize, and I'm not gonna lose sleep over something I have no control over. It's just, if I know that like I said, I'm 36 now. I know, all things considered, unless something changes, I probably have at least another 20 or so, 25 or so years of life left in me. Maybe I make it to 60, maybe I don't. It is what it is. If it ends up being that, I'm content. I'm happy with what I have. I'm probably not going to get anything more. I'm content with what I have. I'm content with my life, if that makes any sense. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna obsess over, again, something that I really don't have any control over. If we all have to pass sometime. We all have an expiration date. Everybody dies at some point. Everybody dies at some point, and when it's your time, it's your time. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Nobody lives forever. And if I end up passing, sooner than I would have if I had taken care of myself, or I gotten in shape, or I did all this and that, that physicians or whatever telling me to, and eat right and all that kind of stuff. It is what it is. I can't concern myself with stuff like that. I'm at that point, where I'm just gonna live my life the way that I want. I'm gonna eat what I want. If I'm big, I'm big. If I'm, it's just one of those kind of things where I'm at that point. Where I just gotta live my life. As comfortably as I can. Because you never know what the next day is going to bring, or if you're even going to make it to the next day. So yeah, I've had people, like I said, doctors and physicians and to a degree family members, and even some people on here, of telling me, oh, you should lose weight, or you should do this, or you should do that, you should make healthier eat, or you should eat healthier choices, or make healthier choices, blah blah blah. And I'm just, all due respect to those folks, I'm kind of at the point now where, like, I'm just gonna live for myself. I just gotta live for me. I just gotta live life as best I can and as comfortably as I can. If that means eating unhealthy or whatever, then so be it. I'm just gonna live for myself. From this point on, it's just I'm kind of at that point now, dude. So yeah, it is what it is, and this is not a knock on anybody or anything. I'm just telling you, like, that's kind of where I stand right now. I'm just gonna live my life, as best I can. I'm just gonna live my life as comfortably as I can. I'm gonna do what I want, and if I want to eat whatever I want, or eat things that may or may not be good for me or stuff like that. That's just my choice. It's just my choice. That's just my preference. So it's one of those things. But yeah. So that's pretty much where my mentality is. That's pretty much where my philosophy is. I just gotta live life as best I can for as long as I can for the time that I have left. I can't worry about satisfying others or appeasing others or or trying to appeal to some unrealistic, or at least for me, unrealistic, public standard or public perception, whatever. I'm just going to live for me. I'm just going to live for myself. I'm just going to do for myself what I think is what I'm just gonna pretty much do what I think, what I want to do. That's, if that makes any sense. So yeah, so that's kind of where I am right now. If I pass, I pass. It's just one of those things, man. That's just kind of where I am right now. Again, I don't mean to, sound, like a downer or anything. I don't mean like to come off as, morbid or whatever. Like I said, there's some subject matter that in this video that I've talked about, may come as pretty morbid, or some people might see it uncomfortable, but that's just kind of where I am. That's kind of where my mentality is. That's what my philosophy is right now. I'm just going to live for myself and live as best I can. Just for the remainder of the time I have on this earth. That's all you can do. That's all I can do. That's all I can do, man. I can't sit here and lose sleep and think about things that I really just have no control over. You just got to keep going and keep doing, what you got to do. I'm going to keep doing what I got to do, or what I can do. And, that's pretty much where I'm at. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say for this video. So I really don't have anything more to add to it than that. Hope you guys have, hope this wasn't too much of a downer video for you, but I just had to say this, get it off my chest, and so just kind of let you guys know where I stand when it comes to my philosophy or life and how I live it, from this point on. But anyway, so hope you guys take it to heart and to kind of understand where I'm coming from with that, because that's just kind of what I see. That's just kind of where I am right now. But that's all I got to say for this video. Thank you for watching this. Hopefully this didn't run too long. It's over 24 minutes now. So, but anyway, that's all I got to say for this video. Thank you for watching. Be sure to leave a like, leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Appreciate all the support I can get. That being said, that's pretty much going to do it, man. So once again, I appreciate everybody. Thank you for helping me get to 800 subs. We're now at 805. Just a little under 200 subs away from hitting 1,000 subs on the channel. Let's get there, man. I hope we can get there by the end of the year. It would be great. But that's all I got to say for this. Thank you for watching. Until next time, Russ Otaku, I'm out for now. See you guys later. Peace.